Welcome to Society and Culture in Provincial America. This is Melinda Cole Klein. Whereas life in the colonies from settlement to the late 1690s had been rustic, this period laid the foundation of the society and culture that was yet to be. While the early colonial period was primitive, the 18th century colonial era from 1700 to 1776 became more intellectual, grew in population and diversity, and became more cosmopolitan. And with it, a more refined society emerged. Colonists from Puritan Yankee traders to Virginia planters sought out the commercial goods for home and for resale. As British America became more materialistic and worldly, it mirrored the transformation that trade had made in the Western world in general. Prosperous colonists purchased from thriving seaport towns the latest fashions: dresses, tailored goods, silverware to fine china, to teapots with cups and saucers, and how-to books that expressed the architectural styles of home building and furniture making popular in England. A part of this commerce was the spread of ideas. Books, newspapers, and correspondence tied people together from across the Atlantic. As family papers have survived for historians to pursue, letters and diaries, along with official town publications, offer a view of this society in its activities, views, opinions, and preferences. Subjects were likely to include fashion, politics, religion, trade, science, to the latest innovations in culinary trends. The influence of Newtonianism, the growth of scientific endeavors, and the evangelical Great Awakening remain the underlying factors that transformed Western society to think in new ways. In time, Enlightenment philosophies of liberty, individualism, and progress challenged long-standing beliefs and practices. The colonies grew rapidly after 1700. Economic development brought handsome gains to some, opened modest opportunities for many, but produced disappointment for the unfree, illiterate, indentured, and farmers out on the Indian frontiers with little access to religion, education, and politics. Then by the 1720s, evangelicalism swept through the colonies, offering many hope for salvation, denied them because of the nearness to churches, the inability to read, or objections to Anglican or Puritan traditions. Population growth and economic development gradually transformed 18th century British America. In time, three colonial societies emerged. 1. The Farming Society of the North, New England, frontier settlements, and middle colonies. Number 2, the Plantation Society of the South, including Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, and Georgia. Number 3, the Urban Society of the Seaport Commercial Towns, such as Boston to Philadelphia, New York, and Baltimore. In 1733, the English poet and writer Alexander Pope concisely captured the philosophy of the individual in the following quote from his essay on man. Quote, "Know then thyself, presume not God to scan. The proper study of mankind is man." End of quote. This line of reasoning supports the position that man, not God, was the proper critic of human behavior, for good or evil. This focus on man's place in the world is the core of Enlightenment thought. This broad philosophical movement argued that the virtues of reason and the methods of science would provide man, through his wisdom and experimentation, insight into natural laws. These natural laws were not limited to the natural world, such as plants and animals, but included the underlying causes of disease, death, mysteries of climate, and natural events. The spark of the Enlightenment movement is credited with the great works from Sir Isaac Newton. This English scientist invented calculus and published his theories on the natural laws of motion, color and optics, and gravity. While most Europeans long held divine powers and magic for the origin of natural events, scientists such as Newton focused on the world here and now, the one that could be studied, data collected, and discussed. This world observed differed greatly from the heavenly explanations offered by priests and ministers. However, it must be noted, Newton's philosophies did not eliminate God or Christian beliefs. Instead, it reworked God's place in the universe of man from the position of absolute ruler. In Newton's scientific world, God was the great timekeeper who fashioned the universe to run according to a set of natural laws. At a higher level, intellectuals such as John Locke argued there were natural laws surrounding rulership, man's role in governing, and education, to include such topics as child rearing. Enlightenment thinkers such as John Locke argued that man had been born with a blank slate, and the biggest influencing factors were not his heritage or the status he inherited from his family. These things in themselves are important. However, it was society and the environment in which the child grew up that formed the adult. This is a current philosophy today. John Locke's theories argued God did not dictate human knowledge, but gave him the power to acquire knowledge through experience and reason. This new optimistic view of the world assigned God a less active role as a creator of the universe and gave to human beings a more active role, an ability to shape their own lives and futures. Yes, man could have control over his own destiny. British American colonials actively read and debated the philosophical ideas coming out of Europe. Thomas Jefferson read Enlightenment books in Virginia. Benjamin Franklin read Rousseau, Voltaire, Diderot in Philadelphia. And this is the same today. The elite, the educated property class, are always reading the same material around the world. The elite tend to be well-informed individuals. Out of the Enlightenment, writers such as the Colonial Ben Franklin reinforced three ideas that are still with us today. Number one, the value of the family, marriage, mother, father, and children. Number two, maintain a solid home life, economic stability in this household with leadership and education. Number three, to pursue literacy and education. As man possessed a rational mind, acquisition of knowledge was the route to which man should aspire. As an educated soul, man could prosper and make good choices and lead effectively his subordinates. In British America, an immigrant could rise above his or her humble beginnings to become anything through hard work, self-sacrifice, and dedication to solid moral principles. We still teach these principles in school today. These were the ideas circulating in newspapers and magazines at the time. Critics argued that poverty could end, criminal activity could be a thing of the past. Enlightenment thinkers such as Ben Franklin took a practical approach to Newtonian ideas. Franklin, the former Boston apprentice who ran away from his brother and began a new life in Philadelphia, became the American symbol of enlightenment. A scientist, social reformer, and diplomat and statesman in his own right. It would be through his writing that colonists heard his voice and this optimism. It would be these principles that molded generations to come. Franklin's practical approach to science would lead to a great range of inventions, from music, including the harmonica, vision, the bifocals, medicine, the catheter, swimming, which included swim fins, to acts of diplomacy and his interest in God's thunder, which would be lightning and electricity, to storing electricity in battery cells. And yes, there were many more Franklin inventions. The simplest and still most in use today was the invention of the lightning rod. We could not have tall buildings able to withstand lightning strikes had it not been for Franklin's lightning rod. Benjamin Franklin played a major role in establishing higher education institutions that would in time become the University of Pennsylvania. His annual Poor Richard's Almanac appeared continuously from 1732 to 1757. The almanac was a bestseller as a pamphlet published in the American colonies. Print runs typically ran to 10,000 copies per year. In regards to social reform, some of his self-help advice in his publications helped individuals get on with their life, again promoting this new way of thinking that one had power over his own destiny. These included many phrases that were easy to remember that might be familiar to you as well. Here are 5. Well done is better than well said. My personal favorite is lost time is never found. Another one, a good conscience is a good continual Christmas. Another one, necessity never made a good bargain. And a last one that I would like you to remember, if your riches are yours, why don't you take them with you to the other world? And many more. Across Europe and in the American colonies, the patriarchal family was the social structure from within. Children were legally born, educated, family economies prospered, and the legacy of the community was passed on to the next generation of residents. This family design was practiced as a part of Christian beliefs, a concept of God's design that assigned degrees of status and rank in the life of all of his individuals. For respectable Christian women, her place in society was defined by the family she was born into and the one to which she married into. As in ancient Greece and Rome, the financially independent, typically men, but this could also include wealthy widows and women in business, were leaders in the family and all others were subordinate. In Christian pre-industrial societies, a woman's civil responsibilities came second to her duties inside the home. However, women did contribute their labor and intelligence to the family economy. This was especially true of women married to artisans, craftsmen, farmers, and merchants. Except for Quaker women, to whom Pennsylvania would become a home colony, along with western New Jersey, colonial Protestant women, including Puritans, Anglicans, Episcopalians, and Presbyterians, did not speak up in church or in public in general. They had no legal voice, but could talk politics in friendly talks at home gatherings to encourage their husbands, perhaps, to vote this way or that. An exception to this political participation would be for women who owned and operated their own businesses. These women signed petitions, spoke out politically, and were included in the male-dominated sphere of influence when needed, such as during war or a time of protest. In the colonial period, women did have veto power to not marry a man of her parents' choosing, if she truly felt in her heart she could never love him. Happy or not, once wed, a colonial woman was expected to remain married until death of her husband, and could rarely obtain a divorce. It was not unusual for a man or woman to be married 2 to 4 times during their life because of spousal death. Most colonial first marriages lasted only 10 years. If widowed, a woman was expected to remarry, but did not have to. Single and widowed women could make contracts, own property, represent themselves in court, and conduct business. Under English law, carried over in the American law after the Revolution, women forfeited these rights once they married. In the colonies, however, British American women did have more rights than her cousins back in England. Although colonial society did not encourage or reward female individuality, women worked alongside their husbands in the pre-industrial colonies, contributing to the family economy. Women had limited career choices, but broad responsibilities. From keeping the family books for the household or the family business, to birthing cows, children, smoking meat, making candles, soap, butter, and cheese. In bad times, they helped the needy, nursed the sick, and helped men too, who had all the authority over their life and her family. Several colonies recognized the legal right for women to own property, have control over their assets after marriage, to own and operate a business themselves, and as the concept of individualism became more common in Western culture, men and women began to choose partners based on their unique qualities, not because that person or this person fit a particular role, as commonly done for centuries. This next section is on family styles. To begin with, discipline and orderly behavior. In the 17th century, fathers were stern, believing in the adage, quote, "Spare the rod, spoil the child," end of quote. Children were to be obedient, dutiful, and quiet. Few colonial parents were reluctant not to punish the child that rebelled or misbehaved. It was believed that if the child did not submit to authority in early age, this would lead to adult issues regarding authority. Guilt or fear from eternal damnation motivated colonials to do the right thing in their society. For children, being observed and known as obedient and a good family member was a quality that could take a young person far in life. For example, to the right occupation, the right marriage, and to be a good parent to their own children. The character of the family lay not within the individual, but within the family itself. So if one member was disobedient or worse, a criminal, this burden of character fell upon the entire family. Again, society was structured and everyone had their proper place. Through discipline, parents believed that breaking the young child's will created a pious and submissive personality. Next topic, education and child rearing. As Puritans believed strongly in a community-based ethics and of the common good, the education and/or support of orphans came under the standard practice of sending children to be educated in the homes and businesses of fellow community members. This was the practice using the age-old system of apprenticeship. Under this system, the apprenticing child lived with his or her master for a series of years until they came of age. For boys in the colony, this was 21. For girls in the colonies, this was 18 or perhaps until marriage. Quakers did not care to send their children to live with another family to learn a trade or skill in preparation for adulthood. For Quaker and for the most part Anglican children, they were educated by their parents, tutors, or could leave for part of the day to learn, in which they would return home by the afternoon or early evening. In this system, the birth parent remained the primary authority figure in the birth child's life. Quaker mothers tended to use love rather than guilt or fear of God to mold their children. Abhorrent to Quakers and Indians was to punish the child using physical force or correction for bad behavior. Their liberal parent-child relationship argued if a child possessed reason, model behavior by the parents is enough to teach the child to be good and honest. For some children, a good example and patient teaching, as we know, is enough. From the nuclear Puritan family style, gradually what emerged was the mother-centered family. Kind, dutiful, patient mother was expected to teach the children and guide them in all things. Nannies and servants, when used in the household, were to follow her directions, while fathers could chime in with recommendation out of earshot of domestic help. Otherwise, this would undermine the wife's authority with servants. Epidemics visited the colonies in North America on a regular basis. Disease and death were common in families. Treatments were typically inadequate as they aimed at purging the body of stresses to the four humors, such as bleeding the patient. From the time of the ancient Greek and Roman medicine standards, theories advocated among physicians from the Middle Ages maintained that balance between the four humors was key to good health. The four humors of the human body are as follows, and they include four fluid districts: wet, hot, dry, and cold. Yellow bile is fire, black bile is earth, phlegm is water, and blood is air. In colonial towns and European cities, a water table is the first system at risk of pollution. Processing of leather put blood, hair, animal fat, tanning acids into the groundwater. Fishing towns and distilleries produced waste products that found their way into streams, rivers, and oceans, causing pollution to water supplies. Because of this and other factors, drinking town water was not done, and considered since Roman times to be very unwise. Fresh water obtained from distant springs came at high prices. From the time of the Greek Aristotle, the miasma theory of disease held that the origin of disease such as cholera, typhoid, or the plague were caused by a miasma, In the Greek language, this means pollution, originating from rotting flesh and organic waste. And this could include leather factories, butcheries, whalers, distilleries, private homes, and more. And this miasma came from bad-smelling fumes emitted into the air, rising to the notion of a noxious bad air form, causing death and disease. In regards to pollution, this made sense from the ancient period through the Industrial Revolution. And today, pollution from standing filth is very hazardous, we all know this, to animal and human health. For example, the concept of miasmas explained why cholera, an infectious disease caused by infected food or water attacking the digestive system, creating death, and other diseases were epidemic in places where the water was left to pool or collect. Smallpox is an acute, infectious disease characterized by fever and skin eruptions. The eruptions leave distinct scars. Practically 100% of non-vaccinated persons, young or old, will come down with the disease once infected. Cause? Unsanitary conditions and overcrowding spreads it quickly in town areas. Pockmarked foreign immigrants are evidence of this in our current America. Place of origin for this disease is unknown, but most likely it came out of Central Africa or India. Its history has been recorded back to ancient Egypt, about 1200 BC. Earliest recorded history of measles or smallpox in Europe was made in the 1400s and the 1500s. But there are many other infectious diseases that killed generations of colonial Americans. This is only one example. Colonial disease and inoculation. Once disease was introduced into the colonies, usually endemic, this means naturally occurring, such as malaria in Virginia, or brought by humans, animals, or commercial products, such as by mosquitoes that could survive on board a ship for long distances. Contagious diseases flourished, and it was likely to reach epidemic proportions. Local and port newspapers carried the news of quarantined ships in harbors and recent people considered ill from various diseases. These scraps of news educated healthy individuals of sickness in their area. As colonies became established and the living conditions improved, health conditions improved as well. Nevertheless, colonial Americans remained subject to such familiar European diseases as smallpox, measles, influenza, also commonly known as the flu. They also endured new and more fatal infections in the form of yellow fever and malaria, the Latin word meaning bad air. Of the diseases plaguing Europe and North America from 1600 to 1775, fewer of them were as universal or as fatal as smallpox. It spread in waves, sometimes appearing years apart. A serious outbreak of smallpox in Boston in 1721 afforded the first opportunity for testing this new medical treatment. A prominent minister, Cotton Mather, had his family physician vaccinate his children. As soon as the news was made public, many people accused Mather of this heathen practice that should not be adopted by Christians. Mather's diary reveals his worry against his neighbors for their superstitions and resistance to scientific innovation. While early inoculation protected the upper classes, persons of African origin and indentured servants were vaccinated as well. When the disease hit again in 1730, 400 people received vaccinations and 3% died out of this group. Normally, 4 out of 10 exposed would die. This equates to 12 out of 400 instead of the typical 40%. There is no question that smallpox inoculation was a great boon to 18th century Americans. For a final example, please take note that the epidemics during 1778 and 1792, 9,000 patients chose to inoculate, which resulted in a few hundred deaths as compared to the likely number of 40%, which out of 9,000 could have come to 3,600 deaths. In Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin, in the Pennsylvania Gazette, wrote in March of 1730, quote, "The practice of inoculation from the smallpox begins to grow among us," end of quote. However, most physicians and the general public were against it. By 1750, vaccinations were given at uneven rates across the colonies. By 1760, a local newspaper in Charleston, South Carolina, boasted 1,500 vaccinated persons in one day. The number of the immunized by the time of the Revolution was the majority of the population. Like today, only new immigrants pose a threat to community health. By the end of the century, the procedure of inoculation was standardized. Doctors were skilled at it, and it was considered an acceptable alternative to avoid the likelihood of death. Colonial America made little contributions to medical knowledge. Although by the time of the American Revolution, the colonies were developing a first set of good-rate doctors. The majority of physicians practicing medicine in the colonies obtained their training as apprentices from MDs who had attended European medical schools and universities. Whereas university medical students were trained in theory, practical knowledge they did not have. Medical experience and aptitude includes the following. Surgeons had little social standing either in Europe or in America during most of the colonial period. Because the medieval church forbade the shedding of blood by ecclesiastics, there became a separation of surgery and medicine. The second feature I'd like you to remember. A physician in England or Europe was a university man. Surgeons were skilled tradesmen, good with a knife, such as a barber, who since ancient times set broken limbs and stitched torn skin. And lastly, physicians diagnosed the disease. Again, they were trained in theory. They pondered over the problem. Nurses, midwives, and barbers did the everyday work of small medical procedures such as the birthing of babies and the repairing of ripped skin or broken limbs. While women were excluded from a university education, a father could allow his daughter to be educated at home or hire a teacher. Keep in mind it was a colonial practice in British America for boys and girls to serve apprenticeships, living with families to learn practical and economical adult skills. Careers for women could be in trade or commerce, teaching, or as a midwife apothecary. When a woman married in this time, she transferred to her husband any property she might have been left by her previous husbands or by her parents. Many first-time husbands were wise to marry widows and daughters of skilled artisans of shops to which they apprenticed, as this gave them an economic leg up in the world. Because midwives served as apothecaries, nurses, and the first line of medical treatment to men, women, and children, you would seek out the advice or service of a midwife if you had a physical ailment, needing relief such as a cold or flu, having a baby, or including health issues regarding women and their reproduction or nursing a baby. Enlightenment thought suggested that man had substantial control, not a minor role, over his or her destiny then thought by priests and ministers. Early 18th century Enlightenment philosophical ideas and the influence of Newtonianism, this is the idea of using reason and observation to evaluate the natural laws of the physical world and society, resulted in treatises on government, all the while challenged long-standing religious beliefs. The Great Awakening started in the 1730s and had about a 10-year run. With religious piety in decline, touring evangelists such as George Whitefield performed open-air sermons to huge crowds, while Puritan communities remained resilient in their beliefs and Bible teaching practices. Other Protestant communities found Puritanism was not quite suitable for them. The vast majority of frontier families could not read or congregate easily to form solidly unified religious communities. The population in the colonies migrated. When land becomes scarce, sons moved to the frontier. This broke former religious ties. Some colonists headed west to start their own farms and towns, taking this highly emotional religious fervor with them. This type of religion appealed to the poor farming families, the uneducated, especially women and blacks. George Whitefield, a former actor, was not university trained. In his sermons, he emphasized the following 3 points. Number 1, it was possible for everyone to have a relationship with God. Number 2, they did not need the leaders in their community. Number 3, that it was not necessary to be able to read the Bible to get to heaven. It was no surprise this religious movement became popular among the lower sector of society. The French and Indian War preceded by the following conflicts: King William's War from 1689 to 1697, Queen Anne's War from 1702 to 1713, and last, King George's War, 1744 to 1748. These wars were fought for different reasons in Europe, but spilled over into the colonies and continued the fighting, usually for conquest of land or for wealth of trade. Always the fighting in the colonies centered on and around Indian allies and Indian relations. The French and Indian War from 1754 to 1763, otherwise known as the 7 Years' War. The war blazed along the American frontier for 2 years before it became the 7 Years' War, from 1756 to 1763. The British government and the nation of France were at war. The 2 phases are included in the following. Number 1, 1754 to 1758. The French very successfully used guerrilla warfare. 1758 to 1760, Anglo-American forces prevailed over the French. This war became a total conquest in which the larger and better supplied army won. In this case, it was the British. The British turning point in the war regarding whether to lose or win happened with the fall of Fort William Henry in 1757. Unable to hold off the Indian natives and the French army, the British at Fort William Henry surrendered in 1757. British Colonel Monroe did not receive the reinforcements he requested from Commander Webb at Fort Edward. he is forced to surrender the fort to the French. As a result of the fall of this fort, colonists and British interests worked together. William Pitt, a brilliant British member of Parliament, takes over the drive to win the war or lose the 13 colonies to the French. Parliament sends thousands of troops and supplies, and the tide of war turns in favor of the English. And this is covered in 2 points. First, the Battle of Quebec in 1759. General James Wolfe defeats the Marquis de Montcalm, and the British win the war. Both Wolfe and Montcalm die in the battle. Second point, the Treaty of Paris 1763 ends the first French colonial empire in North America. French influence remains in certain areas, such as New Orleans. Indians mourn the loss of their French brothers forever. With the win by the British government in the 7 Years' War, the French lose their colonies in North America, some of their colonial possessions in the West Indies, and fishing rights in the North Atlantic around Newfoundland. This was a great place for cod, a very popular fish in Europe and across the colonies. With the treaty, new boundary lines were drawn along other details of peace. For the North American colonists, with peace with France, another situation arose. While British territory expanded into Canada, across the North Atlantic and the Caribbean, the new North American boundary line mandated to frontier families who had settled west of the line that they had to move east of it, designated to create peace with Native Americans. For the frontier families living west of the line, this was seen as an encroachment on their economic survival and land ownership. This new boundary line established by the British government imposed on American colonists out on the frontier the first of many post-7 Years' War grievances. This new boundary line that impacted frontier families the most would be the first of a series of anti-English trade regulations that would, in time, lead some colonists to argue in favor of separation from the empire.